Flight attendants and pilots, what NSFW things occur during your jobs? Story 1. Used to fly in a small commuter plane with 19 passengers, no door behind the cockpit, and also no flight attendant. It's really loud, so communicating is difficult. Hand signals only kind of thing. Just took off on a 30-minute flight and a passenger taps my shoulder, which startles the hell out of me because I can't see him approach me and I'm hand flying. Turns out he just needed to take a leak. No big deal, except that we don't have a bathroom on the plane. We do have these gel packs to use though, so I hand him one and go back to flying the airplane, no autopilot. The flight is full and I'm not sure where I expected him to go. Back to his seat maybe? No, instead I look over to the other pilot and only inches away from our faces is this dude's long, wrinkly dick and a hairy bush that probably hasn't been kept to in decades. As the guy is pissing into the gel packet, we hit some rough air and the urine is going everywhere at this point. On the avionics, both of our uniforms, and my bag. If that wasn't enough, the whole plane saw it. Once he's done, he hands me the gel packets, like I'm supposed to do something with it? Oh no, buddy, I hand him some napkins and point to go back to his seat. Story 2. Not a flight attendant, but I work for an airline and my team receives all kinds of incident reports for what happened in the airplane/airport. Some of the incident reports that came in were so shocking. Every summer we'd have multiple incidents of people having sex on board, in their seats, or in the bathroom. That's pretty standard. But here are a few of the most notable ones that came to our team. A woman breastfeeding a kitten refusing to stop. Yes, you heard that correctly. No, I'm not kidding. A woman who exposed her breasts completely and ran up and down the aisles. A drunk man attempted to molest the woman beside him by pretending he was asleep and touching her/falling into her lap. Really, dude? A woman on a red-eye flight asked to stop no blanket or anything, just her and her whispering eye out for all to see. The flight attendant said in the report that she didn't make eye contact but told the woman, "Everyone can see what you were doing and we need you to stop." The woman was so embarrassed, gave a panicked sorry, and stopped. This happened at the airport, but it's my favorite. A male was using the airport washroom, and then a fully naked man comes crashing out of the ceiling right on top of the man using the washroom. The naked man scrambled and climbed right back into the ceiling without saying a word. The man using the washroom was in complete shock and told one of our managers that we have a problem in the washroom. I howled at that. Security and police couldn't find the guy for the longest time, but when we finally did, he was a homeless guy living in the ceiling, still naked when they found him. He got in because of the construction at the airport. My sister was working at the airport when this happened, and the incident report came from the head of security. I giggle every time I think of this. I've had so many what moments working in my department. I truly can't believe some of the things that have happened. Story 3. As a flight engineer in the Air Force flying out of an island in the Pacific, a sailor had fallen overboard and drowned. The Navy recovered his body a few days later. Since this is downrange, only a body bag is available, not a transport casket. Before takeoff, the loadmaster comes to the cockpit, screaming, yelling, and babbling. He says the body in the bag is wiggling. Turns out eels have entered his body via his mouth and are wiggling within his body and causing the movement. Holy hell, that is so disturbing. Story 4. Not me, but a friend who's a flight attendant who came across this really stubborn male passenger who wanted a sanitary pad that he saw the flight attendant hand over to a female passenger, convinced that it was an eye mask thingy that you put on before sleeping. Arguing with her about it, she finally gave in and gave the sanitary pad to a guy who coolly removed the anti-adhesive and stuck it onto his eyes and went to sleep. He probably realized about halfway through this argument and decided to tough it out rather than lose face. Story 5. A couple of our boys were on the return leg of an offshore crew change. 15 minutes out from the deck, they catch a movement in the back. One of the passengers had unbuckled his harness and is getting out of his seat. Big no on a helicopter. But before they can say or do anything, the guy grabs an airsick bag, drops his dax, and positions the bag under his bum and lets it rip. The bag lasted maybe 3 seconds. Explosive does not do this bout of diarrhea justice. Volcanic might not. If I hadn't seen the photos, I wouldn't have believed it. It coated the floor, his seat, the seat beside it, and the poor sods in them. Splashed the windows and ceiling and row of seats behind him. Poop everywhere. And the smell. The real kicker is that even though they were only 15 minutes from the rig, they couldn't go back. If they did, the chopper would be stuck on the deck until it could be decontaminated by a cleaning crew. There was only one deck, so we'd have to send a second helicopter out to winch it down, said the cleaning crew. A dangerous and expensive operation. Meanwhile, everyone due to come off a swing in the next few days would be stuck on the rig until we did. Well, there wouldn't be enough beds in the town for the incoming crews. And the nature of the rig is such that it cannot fully operate while there's a chopper on the deck. Literally millions of dollars in lost production. One dude with a rumbly tummy he didn't tell the rig medic about because he was just that keen to get home, and several hundred people are potentially right up poop creek. So they take one for the team and push on. Tell the culprits to sit back and put his harness back on and pray for a tailwind. 2 hours flying back to base. It's Australia, tropical, and summer, and commercial helicopters do not have great aircon. The smell gets worse and worse. It's not helped by when some guys have to use the sick bags for their intended purpose. By the end of the flight, the pilots are all but flying with their heads out of the cockpit windows just trying to breathe, and have given serious consideration to landing as soon as they were over the mainland, or any land. When they finally got in, it was approaching swamps of Dagobah-level stank. Never had a disembark that fast. You'd better believe the pilots did shut down in record. There was a queue for hoses. When the engineers started to do a damage assessment, it was even worse. That shit was runny and grainy and found its way into every crack and crevice and bolt hole. The seats nearest to the guy were literally soaked in shit and puke, and it was a life vest and cabin raft. There was even a splash in the cockpit. Everywhere. We had to fly in a specialist cleaning crew. The kind that normally does crime scenes and fully strip and dismantle the cabin down to their bare fuselage. In the end, the guy's seat and the seat of the guy to his right were so saturated, so caked and stained and soaked with his shit that we had to write them off. Tens of thousands for the replacement, plus more in maintenance and lost flying time. The guy in that second seat sat there coated head to toe in his seatmate's shit the entire flight without moving or saying a word. Story 6. My wife and I bought last-minute tickets to a family event and could not get seats next to each other. Once we boarded, I convinced the guy sitting next to my wife to switch seats with me. The nice guy takes my assigned seat, which was next to a woman who apparently was suffering from the flu. 5 minutes after we take off, she projectile vomits, but tried to use a pillow to cover her mouth, which just made the vomit spray out sideways, all over the poor guy. He just sits there for a moment, frozen, and then slowly turns back to look at me with his face that said, "You did this to me, and I will forever hate you for it." I offered to buy him a drink, but he ignored me. It was a 6-hour flight. Story 7. I was on a flight to China. One of the passengers up in the business class decided to take advantage of the unlimited drinks he was offered before takeoff. He got plastered. When the plane started to take off, he decided to take a sleeping pill to tide him over for the 14-hour flight we were about to endure. Well, shortly after takeoff, the guy decided that he needed to use the bathroom. He ventures back to where the stalls are, but shoots past them. He walks about 3 rows ahead of my row, whips out his member, and pisses all over the row and the people in it. They had to move the passengers, rip out the seats, and monitor the guy for the rest of the flight. Whatever happened to him, I have no idea. I'm just glad he didn't hold it in for 3 more rows. Story 8. I used to work as a baggage guy, loading and unloading planes. On our planes, we had to put the passengers' pets into a small area in the front belly compartment. We had an inbound flight that had quite a few pets on board. When I opened the compartment door, I was hit with the most gut-wrenching dog poop smell. Once I was able to see through my watery eyes, I saw one large dog kennel pressed up against a small kennel. The idiots that loaded the plane had put both of the kennel's front gate ends together. The larger dog must have pressed up its ass against it and shit through the gate because the little dog was covered in shit and in the corner quivering and whimpering. Trying to explain and apologize to the dog's owner was one of the hardest and funniest things I've ever had to do. Story 9. On a trip to Cancun, everyone was drinking, getting their vacation on early. Somehow, a passenger lets loose the most silent, most deadly fart ever. It was the kind of smell that caused complete strangers to become friends in a shared moment of horrid existence. Lots of gagging. The stench awoke my sleeping girlfriend. The stewardess, en route to call Button further up the section, stopped, gagged, and turned back around, fleeing to safety. Story 10. I'm a pilot and spent lots of time scouring the National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, reports for various reasons. One time I ran across an interesting one. The NTSB's probable cause was the pilot in command improper in-flight decision to divert her attention to other activities not related to the conduct of the flight. Contributing to the accident was the exceeding of the design limits of the airplane leading to a wing failure. The rest of the report indicates that the occupants were partially clothed and the front right seat was in full aft reclining position. Unfortunately, they did not survive the crash, but I always found the NTSB's wording of the report more entertaining than I probably should have given the circumstances. They word things very professionally, and I'm sure someone had to come up with a way of saying that they were having sex and crashed without actually saying it. Story 11. Survey pilot here. Sometimes when I'm flying back and forth for 5 hours straight, I need to piss in a bottle. One of my coworkers had his dick slip out of the bottle while he was going full bore, and he pissed all over the instruments panel. You should have heard his desperation on the radio. A couple of months later, for our bi-monthly rotation, a new guy took his plane, and we didn't tell him that Greg had pissed all over it like a moron. Stupid Greg. Hey guys, are you enjoying the video? If so, please like and subscribe as it really helps the channel a lot. Anyway, back to the stories. Story 12. I was a flight attendant in the Marine Corps. Inside joke, helicopter crew chief. Mechanic who flew in the back of a helicopter and served as the aircraft commander's extension of authority in the cabin of the plane, also unloaded cargo, calculated weight and balance, operated crew, served weapons, and generally just worked as an additional set of eyes and ears, especially for things that the pilots can't see, like looking straight down. Anyways, I worked on V-22s, and for cross-country flights, we would go up over 10,000 feet. We had a bunch of auxiliary fuel tanks in the cabin, so you could squeeze by then if you needed, but can't really see them back there. The guy in the back said to me on ICS, internal comm system, "Hey, I'm going off ICS. If you don't hear from me in 2 minutes, come back and put my oxygen mask on." He came back on the ICS a short time later, and I asked him on a private channel what he was going to do so the pilots wouldn't hear. And he took off his oxygen mask at 25,000 feet so he could jerk off while hypoxing, along with the lines of autoerotica asphyxiation. Story 13. My mom has been a flight attendant for Air Canada for 43 years. I've heard lots of stories, but one always stuck with me. Back in the 80s, when China was just opening up, my mom would get a lot of older folks from rural China on her flights from Beijing or Hong Kong. Apparently, many of the people had never used a modern flush toilet before. On more than one occasion, they would simply close the lid, position themselves on top of the toilet, and proceed to defecate on top of the toilet seat before leaving. Also, many of these folks would apparently just suck up huge gobs of phlegm and spit it right in the middle of the aisle. Luckily, things have gotten better in the intervening years. Story 14. I am a test pilot for a small startup. Landed a few weeks ago at a small airport in the middle of nowhere to empty my piss bottle and fill up my water bottle. My right seat wanted to check out the heli that was there, Long Ranger. I went to use the bathroom and he comes running to me. Turns out the 2 medics for the local medevac service were in heli, making Bam Bam. We got to watch them both run naked from heli to their training station. On the way out over the radio, we asked never to discuss what we saw. Story 15. I'm a co-pilot for this company that charters private jets. We had a customer who boarded with his bros and several beautiful women in revealing clothing. And in the air, we could hear a party going on back there. Loud music, men laughing and cheering, and girls giggling. After a while, the door opens and someone taps me on the shoulder. I look and a completely naked woman casually asks me how much longer we have before landing. I tell her that we have a couple more hours to go and she returns to the back. Story 16. I have a female friend who flies transatlantic as a flight attendant. She told me a story of how one of the passengers had been in the bathroom for at least 15 minutes. Being a busy flight, people were pissed off and complained to her that he had been in there for a long time. She went to the door and knocked a couple of times with no response. Obviously, being concerned for the passenger's safety, the doors were opened. Inside was a guy on the toilet, trousers around his ankles, headphones in his phone with porn playing, and a flaccid penis in hand. Bro fell asleep while whacking it in an airplane toilet. Embarrassment ensued. The only thing that surprises me is that he actually fell asleep during it. Story 17. Just a plane passenger, but this happened on my last flight. About halfway through, the pilot comes on the intercom and says, "Please come out of the bathroom, smoking in an airplane is illegal." Naturally, this gets the whole plane on edge. Turns out it was a really old woman who was completely naked and vaping in the bathroom while refusing to come out. They eventually had to break into the bathroom and take her out, which then caused the woman to try and fight the flight attendants. She was arrested as soon as we landed. Why was she naked? Story 18. A few years ago, I was working on an early morning flight from Indiana to Atlanta. We're trained to keep an eye out for able-bodied passengers, ABP, so we have an idea of who might be helpful in the event of an emergency toward the end of boarding. I noticed this huge guy come on and immediately label him an ABP in the back of my mind. He was probably 6'4" and seriously built. I went to brief the exit row and wasn't surprised to find him sitting there. Extra legroom, but was surprised that he totally passed out. He had come on like 4 minutes earlier. I tapped him and said, "Sir," a few times, and when he didn't respond, I decided to go ahead and brief the rest of the exit row passengers and wake him up after. I ended up having to shake him pretty aggressively to wake him up. He woke up, let me brief him, and agreed to exit seat responsibilities, and then immediately went back to sleep. It was wintertime and we had to de-ice the plane after we got pushed back from the gate. The line for the de-icing pad was pretty long, so when it was our turn, the captain came on and said that for the next 15 minutes, people could use the restroom while we were parked. I was sitting on my jump seat in the aft and was a little surprised to see a big guy awake and carrying me to the restroom. The 15-minute window came and went, and the captain came on again, asking everyone to take their seats. The big guy was still in the bathroom. I knocked a few more times and didn't get a response, so I called the captain to let him know what was going on, and also asked the other flight attendants to come and help me in case something bad had happened. For another minute or so, he pounded loudly on the door and got no response. It was time to break in. I shouted, "We're coming in," and got the door open, only to find him passed out on the toilet with his pants around his ankles and his junk dangling in plain view. We ended up having to aggressively shake him awake again. He finally woke up to see 3 women staring at him half naked on the toilet and very nonchalantly looked down at his dick and then back up at us before pulling his pants up and heading back to his seat without flinching or even saying a single word. I'm not sure he would have had much help in an emergency. Story 19. Not a pilot or a flight attendant, but I fly between 100 and 150 flights a year. One time I was flying out of a small Midwest airport to Dallas. I roll up to the airport restaurant/bar to get a bite and a drink before the takeoff. I noticed this lady was sitting by herself at the bar. A gentleman approaches her, and they seem to be hitting it off, flirting, laughing, etc. The time comes to board the plane, and since this was on Southwest Airlines, it picked your own seat. Naturally, they sit next to each other. I am a few rows behind them. Flirting leads to touching and then kissing, and you could see that their hands are wandering everywhere. By this point, I'm not the only casual observer, and about 3 or 4 other guys are looking and laughing. We all bond over their public display. It escalates to a point where she gets up to go to the bathroom, and about 30 to 40 seconds later, he follows. Apparently, they thought that was enough time to be inconspicuous. As he approaches the bathroom she's already in, a flight attendant stands in front of him and says, "No, back to your seat." She knocks on the door and tells the lady to get back to her seat. All the observers are laughing at this point, so the flight continues and she is practically mounted on him, doing everything we could possible while keeping clothes on. This continues until we land and we all deplane. She quickly hurries off the plane and he's a few steps behind her, but she seems to be in a hurry. The other observers and I are talking about it and laughing as we exit the secure area into the baggage claim area. Then we see her, still several steps ahead of the guy, and she runs into the arms of her boyfriend and starts kissing him. Her flight guy just stops dead in his tracks, takes a couple of seconds to observe, and then just leaves. I hadn't laughed so hard in public with people I'd never met prior to or since. Story 20. This happened to another pilot at our company. We fly small planes with no doors between the cockpit and the cabin. We usually put our jackets behind our seats. A passenger sitting in the front seats could easily grab them without us noticing. At the end of one flight, we noticed that the passenger on the left front seat was sitting on his jacket. Very odd, but whatever. The passenger deplaned and he went to pick up his jacket, and that's when I hit him. The passenger had taken a shit on the seat, grabbed the pilot's jacket and put it over the shit and sat back down on it. It was only a 20-minute flight. How badly did you have to go? Story 21. Not an attendant or a pilot, but one time on a flight to Hawaii, my mom was sitting behind me and next to this guy who was setting off weird vibes. I couldn't tell at the time because I was generally clueless and enamored with the beautiful show cat that he had under the seat. My mom was next to the window, sleeping, when she felt a lot of action going on next to her. Looks at her seatmate and he's furiously jerking off under a thin blanket that shows everything. Stares right at her like in that scene from We Need to Talk About Kevin. My mom clams up and didn't tell me or the flight attendant what was happening, which was kind of stupid in hindsight. I was awake watching a movie in front of her, never knowing what was going on. Story 22. About 15 years ago, when I was in my final year of 6th grade, a girl and I hit it off on a school trip to Hawaii. On the flight back to London, we sat next to each other. She proceeded to jerk me off, as Americans put it. I was next to a window. She was in the middle. My teacher was in the outer seat. I feel terrible about it now, my poor teacher. But at 17, that was the best thing that ever happened to me. I'm counting it as the Mile High Club. Story 23. I'm not a pilot or a flight attendant, but I do work on the ramp. Here are a few things I would like to share. Ladies, please wear underwear, please. Guys, too. Working smaller regional jets, I've seen a lot of, naughty bits because some people prefer to go commando. When you walk down the jet bridge, you leave your carry-on for valet, and if you wear a skirt or no underwear, the people on the ground 12 feet below you have a chance of catching a glimpse of your bits. It's not often, but after 10 years of doing this, I've seen quite a few people's junks, both male and female, because of shorts and skirts and commando. We're not offended, but we will make lame jokes about your shit for the next 10 minutes. Put a goddamn name tag on and in your bag. Tags fall off, and if you have no quick way to ID who you are in your bag, we do search and catalog your belongings. Like the dirty, crusty panties I had to dig through wearing gloves to find the syphilis meds to help return a lady's bag. Or the bag with the laptop with a huge Iowa Hawkeye sticker on it, to which the password was GoHawks1. That took 4 tries to guess. Their browser history was eclectic. Found that joker on Facebook after closing the various porn tabs. Khaki pants and some J.Crew shirts were not enough to ID a person. Or the singles cruise guy whose bag had no ID and we ended up sending it to HQ to sit in a warehouse. That guy had like 10 to 12 Polaroids of his dick just lying about in his bag, not in a stack, layered throughout his clothes. His photo from the singles cruise was all that we had to go on. No name, just dick pics, like a calling card or something. Hand it in to the ladies on a singles cruise and find a mate? I still wonder about him. 20 plus condoms left over in the bag. Did he buy the big box and slam it, or did he get the medium box and do okay? I'll tell you one thing, that dude has high hopes and swung for the fences. I've reconnected people to their bags through boner pills, names on magazine subscriptions to dubious publications, and all manner of diseases relating to naughty bits because of medication. I've seen your porn, dildos, vibrators, and your crotchless panties in your lube. I've actually found photographs, like proper prints of sexual stuff I won't describe, but it was old people doing stuff. We never say how we found you, nor do we mention your content at all. The looks on people's faces when they come to collect, or the shift in their tone of voice once they put 2 and 2 together, is priceless. Use a goddamn name tag. Stuff happens. You don't want syphilis, I'm sure, and I don't want to touch your crusty underwear.